Krakow's here.
Hello, board member. Hello, Mayor McCallan.
Hello.
It looks like we are still waiting for our chair. I just got a text from the chairman. He's going to be 1 to 2 minutes late.
Matt, do you want to do the housekeeping now?
I was just going to suggest that. Thank you, Wayne. Since it is now 12 o'clock, the noon hour, the beginning of our technology committee. So good afternoon and thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the technology committee. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation, and we ask your cooperation and patience as we navigate this together. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for board members and the South Coast AQMD staff, as well as invited guests, will be placed on mute by the host, which means you will not be able to mute or unmute yourselves manually. However, after each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment and you may make public comment at that time. For those of you on Zoom, if you would like to make public comment, there is a raise hand button at the bottom right hand of your screen. This will signal to the host that you would like to make public comment and you'll be added to the list. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, there's likewise a raise hand button at the bottom of the screen. For those of you calling in using the phone line, you may dial *9 on your keypad, which will signal that you would like to make comment. And your name will be added to the list and you will be unmuted automatically when it is your turn. If you are making public comment, please adhere to the speaker limit. We ask and we expect all participants to adhere to the normal guidelines for public decorum, specifically treating others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Profanities, discriminatory comments, and other obscene gestures are prohibited. If you cannot abide by these guidelines, you will be removed from the meeting at the chair's discretion. And so I will turn it over to the chair, and I do not see him here yet, so we will wait patiently. He is on his way.
I'm going to take off my tie for Larry.
Or I should put one on.
Figure if I dress up, people take me more seriously, Larry. We have any sense, Mr. Nastri, as to any visibility on when these meetings might be in person again?
Thanks, board member. It's a really good question. One of the things that we've told our staff is that we don't anticipate coming back until the earliest January of 2021. But there are so many factors that we have to consider. One is, what is the status of a vaccine? We also wanted to look at how we would actually bring people back. We don't anticipate bringing our staff back en masse. We do anticipate that it would probably be a phased-in approach, taking into considerations various existing conditions of various employees. And then the other aspect too is how long the executive orders are going to endure, if you will, for the meetings of this type. One of the things that we found is that, you know, we actually do have greater participation in a number of these meetings. And we have, and as you'll recall at the last board meeting, we've heard people talk about the fact that they don't have to drive to Diamond Bar and they can participate. So a lot of that is directly related to the executive order and not having the requirement that the public has access to the board members' individual homes when they do so. So that's actually something I know that many people are talking about, trying to see if that can endure, if you will. But there are questions regarding Brown Act and public access. So it's hard
Chairman's
to
right.
answer exactly when it is. I know I've heard other districts say that they don't anticipate going back until mid 21, if not late 21. So we'll just
Wayne,
see.
the chairman has arrived.
And I defer to the chairman.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks so much. Sorry for the delay. I was on the line here with our airport director, so sorry for the delay. Hope you're all well. Are we all up and running here? We are recording. We're live. Welcome to today's AQMD Tech Committee. Today is October 16th. If we can now move to roll call, please.
Supervisor Bartlett,
Here.
Board Member Krakow,
Here.
Mayor McCallan,
Here,
Councilmember Mitchell,
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Here.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. With that, members, if I can direct your attention to today's agenda, I want to take item number 4 out of order. We do have before us Ms. Godkin, who is the Deputy Secretary for Cal EPA, to speak on this item. So with that, let us take item number 4. Item 4 is now before us. If you can read that item into the record.
Thank you, Chairman Buscaino. This is Matt. If I might just give a brief introduction and to welcome Deputy Secretary Godkin to our Technology
Please.
Committee. The Deputy Secretary was appointed by Governor Newsom in August of 2019 to serve as a Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Emergency Response. So she has had her hands full in terms of dealing with all the wildfires raging in California, but also
Sure.
more recently, because of the governor's executive order on electric vehicles that has spurred the question on what do you do with all of the spent batteries that would result. And so this is a very timely presentation by the Deputy Secretary, and we're very pleased to have her here. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Deputy Secretary, are you on?
I am. So thank you for that introduction, Matt and Mr. Chair, and also to all of the members of the committee. My name is Caroline Godkin. I am the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Emergency Response here at Cal EPA. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I really do appreciate you accommodating my schedule. We are deep into recovery from the fires around the state, so it's a busy time. So just a little bit about my portfolio here at Cal EPA. I provide policy support to the Secretary in the areas of DTSC and Cal Recycle. And then obviously the emergency response portion, which covers our debris operations, both the household hazardous waste and the cleanup that is conducted through Cal Recycle. The Cooper program is also part of my portfolio. So it's certainly very broad, has kept me busy for the last year, but I'm extremely honored to have the challenge, and I appreciate working with the Secretary and Governor Newsom's team. Next slide, please. So as Matt said, I was asked by the Secretary to chair this group, and it was in large part because it falls across the 2 areas of my portfolio. The hazardous waste, hazardous materials portion, and then also the recycling extended responsibility portfolio with Cal Recycle. It was created in 2018 by statute by now Senator Daly. And it, on the one hand, has a very simple charge, which is to ensure that as close to 100% as possible of lithium-ion vehicle batteries in the state are reused or recycled at the end of life in a safe and cost-effective manner. Again, it sounds like a simple charge, but the work of the committee is really digging into what that means. We are going to be looking at the entire life cycle considerations for the batteries, including what are the barriers for reuse as energy storage systems, best management considerations, and the overall effect of different management practices on the environment. Our recommendations are due to the legislature, April of 2022, which is very soon. It feels like it might be a long time away, but it's actually really very soon. So next slide, please. So the statute was very prescriptive in terms of the membership of the committee. On the state side, we have both CalRecycle representatives, CalEPA and DTSC, and we've recently been joined by a colleague from the Energy Commission. Chair Hochschild was very keen to make sure that all of our work was brought together and that we had the thread. So we're very fortunate to have a member of the Energy Commission staff join us. Then the other representation, we selected them through an application process, and there was a requirement for a vehicle manufacturer. So you'll see there we have representatives from Honda, from Ford, and from Tesla, a vehicle manufacturer association, an e-waste recycler, an automotive repair dealer, a dismantler, an automotive dismantler, which is obviously an important perspective to bring to this, as they may be some of the first people that are handling these batteries at the end of their vehicle life, an energy storage, a standards organization, and also a battery manufacturer. We have been incredibly fortunate for the number of professionals who have volunteered their time to join this group and to have their expertise and to bring their expertise of their organization. So next slide, please. So how we are doing our work, we are required by statute to meet at least quarterly. As we have all experienced, 2020 has been a little bit of a bumpy ride. However, we have, in a similar fashion, transitioned to fully online meetings, which has actually been somewhat beneficial, particularly for our auto manufacturer colleagues who are coming out of Michigan. We will be meeting more frequently next year as we move this group towards the development of recommendations. We did receive funding for a research support with UC Davis, and the UC Davis researchers will be helping us with crafting the final report and providing the direction of the committee. They've already provided support, for example, translation supports for different regulations. And we've spent this year establishing a baseline and an understanding of what it is, the issues we need to look at. As you saw, the membership of the committee is very broad, and it represents a huge level of diversity in terms of baseline information and understanding. So we've heard from battery recyclers, from battery reuse experts, including some of those who have received pilot grants for work here in California for car battery reuse. This week we heard from policy experts from around the world, including a researcher from the University of Newcastle in the UK who presented on the European Union's framework. And we also this week heard from DTSC on the general background on hazardous waste regulations and handling in the state. And DTSC will be providing ongoing support in terms of explaining what that regulatory framework is for each stage of a potential battery's life. Okay, so next slide, please. So it's, as you are all aware, this is a huge issue. And as Matt said at the start of the presentation, has an additional focus now with the governor's executive order for 100% zero emission vehicles by 2035. We will start to see large scale retirements of electric vehicles within the next 5 to 10 years as the batteries reach the end of their life for in-vehicle high power applications. Currently, there are very significant barriers to what it means to reuse these batteries or even to manage them at the end of their life. This is a developing technology. This is a developing issue that is coming. Right now, we are starting to see these batteries show up in household hazardous waste facilities. We are seeing them start to show up in landfills, which is obviously very problematic. Just last week, I believe there was a fire at a metal recycler, which we can actually see from the Cal EPA building. And we suspect that it may have been caused by the mismanagement of a lithium-ion battery. The global value chain is also posing problems in a similar fashion to all of the value chain for recycling and what we have faced since 2019. And then also the current relatively low prices on the raw inputs or the virgin materials for batteries is going to present a challenge as we look towards recycling. And obviously, as we are all aware, the capital investment required to ramp up recycling infrastructure is huge. And in the statute, we are specifically required to consider in-state and out-of-state recycling options and what that means and what that will look like. Certainly, as we learned this week, the European Union, many jurisdictions in the European Union are actually driving towards keeping materials within the jurisdiction in which they reach the end of their life. So what does that look like and what does that mean for California? And then also, there is potential for battery reuse, but huge questions on policy, particularly as it relates to the implementation of an extended producer responsibility model. If the producer in that case is the vehicle manufacturer, what does that mean for second use? So next slide, please. So I pulled this from a presentation that UC Davis put together, and this is a McKinsey study that identified that the California need for grid storage could actually be met through the retirement of the forecast retirement of these car batteries. And one thing to note, and note, very former life, I used to be an engineer, but I now just kind of dabble with it. So bear with me on the technical side, that the car battery use is extremely high power from these batteries. Once they drop below 80% of their capacity, they are no longer useful for car battery, particularly for range use. However, they still can be extremely valuable for grid storage or other second life energy usage. So the questions that the committee have really started to grapple with is, what policies would we need to put into place to start to facilitate this? What does it mean to have these be used for energy storage? And then who would be responsible at the end of that second life? What happens at that point? Because ultimately that is when the battery will need to be disposed of, or it will need to be recycled in some way. And what does this second life mean for the economics of this marketplace? In addition, the other issue is about tracking of batteries. We've heard from a couple of Department of Energy sponsored projects who are creating tracking mechanisms to make sure that in a similar way, the company who actually spoke with us, who were awarded the pilot, track diamonds and high-end wine. So how do you know that you're not getting a counterfeit battery when you are purchasing one of these? How do you know that the battery has not been in an accident or has not been in a natural disaster and would be in some way compromised? The European Union is looking at a pilot study for battery passports, which would also incorporate information of how the battery was used, because the ultimate cycling of the battery, again, keep in mind, I very former life as an engineer, the cycling of the battery can also impact its performance characteristics going forward. So it's a huge issue that we're going to be digging into next year. And it's one of those areas where UC Davis and their researchers will be providing us some of the support as it relates to the economics of this market. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a graphic that UC Davis provided to us that takes the materials all the way through from mining through to ideally battery use, second use, and then into some kind of recycling. Obviously, you see on the right-hand side there what we have to avoid is these materials ultimately ending up in landfills or in household hazardous waste facilities where they can be extremely problematic for handling and also costly. We have a municipal solid waste operator on the committee, and it costs them about $1,500 per one of these batteries that is showing up. And so the potential for this to show up and to be a burden on ratepayers is huge. So we did hear from a company called LI Cycle. They're currently based in Rochester and also in Toronto, and they are working on the hydro process recycling that you see there. And they are developing a hub and spoke model where they would be collecting these batteries from around the world and bringing them over to their facilities in Toronto and into Rochester. And I believe they are pretty much close to 100% of materials recovery with their process. And again, the European Union is considering looking at, or some jurisdictions rather within the European Union are considering goals to keep materials within the market in which they reach the end of their life. So again, the work of this committee is huge, and we have some really significant issues to make recommendations to the legislature on. For me, the top of mind is what is the interaction with potential extended producer responsibility models and second use? And also, are there additional models such as leasing of batteries, which could facilitate both cycles of this use? What are the economics as it relates to these, and where do we need policies to intervene to drive the economics of these marketplaces? And obviously, we're very focused on the governor's 2035 goal, and also the goal of ensuring that electric vehicles are accessible and that they aren't just a high-end product. So what are the costs that we're looking at there? And then how ultimately do we keep these batteries out of the waste stream? There is an end of life management cost, that there is that cost. Where should this be borne? How is this looked at throughout the life cycle of the battery? And how is this safely either recycled, disposed of, or reused at the end of its life? We are working very closely with the team who are implementing the executive order for 2035. And also, I just wanted to flag for everyone, the governor recently signed AB 1657, which has the Energy Commission develop a blue ribbon commission looking at lithium extraction in California. Again, we're extremely fortunate to have a member of the Energy Commission staff on our team, so we will be weaving all of those strands together. So next slide, please. And so you can follow our work here. All of our meetings are being streamed right now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary, for your presentation. Really appreciate this being in front of an issue that's been concerning to some of our colleagues here in light of, though we agree with the framework and the direction that the governor's is moving on, ultimately will help reduce our air emissions through these mobile sources. So really appreciate your leadership and guidance. I'd like to turn it over to colleagues for any questions.
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Mitchell.
I understand that these lithium ion batteries are made up with certain rare minerals, and I've further understood that China has a dominance in this market for now. So I'm going to ask you what impact that could have on our recycling of these batteries? Can we extract these rare minerals and reuse them in manufacturing new batteries for electric transportation?
Thank you. That's a really great question. And yes, certainly there are rare minerals in this. On the lithium side, it is certainly what has spurred the discussion of potential lithium extraction in the Imperial Valley around the Salton Sea with the geothermal resources. There is also, I learned the moderately horrifying term artisanal mining, which is the use of child labor in, I believe, the Democratic Republic of Congo for the mining of cobalt. And so that is obviously a significant concern. One of the issues that we are digging into in light of recent events is I believe that Tesla has committed to removing cobalt from its batteries. And so what does that mean for the economics of it? But as currently prices are somewhat lowered for virgin materials. And so the question is always around the economics of recycling and how we wish to meet our goals of not using these rare minerals versus the economics of recycling. So it's definitely something that we are grappling with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions for our Deputy Secretary here?
Dr.
Well, hearing none, thank you. Oh, yes.
Supervisor Bartlett has a question.
Ms. Bartlett?
Yes, sorry, I had a raise hand up. So quick question. I know there are a number of battery recyclers. Do we have any idea of the size of their operations? For instance, what percentage of the used batteries are these recyclers actually recycling?
That is a great question. I do not know the answer off the top of my head. I believe right now it is a relatively, I think the demand for recycling is relatively small, but also they are getting up. But I believe we have had that material presented to us, and I would be happy to get back to you with that answer.
Okay, that would be great. I think that would be helpful for our board and also for the AQMD staff. And then the two methods that you mentioned, the pyro and the hydro, which one is used more commonly? Are used to a greater extent, or are they both about the same?
I believe right now the pyro one, I'm going to say it like that because I won't get the rest of the word out, is the more common. The hydro version, I believe, has better recovery rates, and I always am cautious about putting my suggestions on technology, but it is my understanding that the hydro both has better recovery rates and also has potentially fewer side effects is not the right word, but you know what I mean, unintended consequences.
Okay, so that was my next question as a follow-up to that, relative to which one is a greater generator of emissions. So that would probably be the pyro then as opposed to the hydro. Is that correct?
As technology currently stands, I believe that is the case.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Mr.
Okay,
Chair?
with that, I don't see,
Mr.
yes, I did hear Ms. Rodriguez. Is that you, Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Appreciate the presentation and thank you for taking the time today. I'm just curious about what you anticipate the policy implications would be to ensure that there's not an unintentional consequence of just as the diagram had, the red arrow pointing to a landfill. What will be anticipated as policies to mitigate that situation from occurring? As the chart indicated, it will be ramping up the total amount of these batteries significantly over the next decade. So is there a situation where there'll be policies such as, I guess liken it to now, you have to, you're registering your car, you get a smog check. There's some type of situation when a battery is being replaced that there's a certified recycler that the battery needs to be presented to, or just can you give us a sense of how we could ensure what type of policies you anticipate might be on the horizon?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I don't wish to be pre-decisional on behalf of the committee, but certainly the types of models that we will be looking at, informed by both what is happening in China, the European Union and Japan, will either be, and also for other products of this nature and what has been successful here in California, some kind of potentially extended producer responsibility. So the producer of the battery, however that is defined, is responsible for the disposition of the battery at the end of its life. We will also be looking at providing recommendations, exactly as you say, for the handling of these batteries as they come out of vehicles. Again, that hopefully would be diverted to a useful second life if possible. But if not, and then who is responsible at that point for paying for the end of life of that battery? The European Union is also considering minimum recycled content. Or some of the jurisdictions in the European Union, I should say, minimum recycled content for batteries, which will also drive demand for the material coming out of it. So all of those types of items, because ultimately there is a cost of end-of-life management, and we have been given the charge to figure out how to, in the best economic sense, to distribute that cost throughout the life cycle of the vehicle, keeping in mind the state's other goals.
Just if you allow me a follow-up, what would those currently costs amount to? And let's just follow-up question to that. Based on the number of facilities, recycle facilities that we have currently, is there an estimate of how many more we would need over the next decade? And does that represent we need 50% more, 80% more? So just you help with the costs, and then how much more facilities we need.
Those are great questions, which is what we have the UC Davis research team digging in right now. Because ultimately that economic underpinning is going to drive our recommendations and inform the legislature on how they should act going forward. So I'll be happy to come back and talk to you this time next year when we have that research from UC Davis.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, McCallum.
Please.
What kind of policies for the funding mechanism for all this are being considered and potentially be recommended to the legislature? At
this point, we're doing a very broad look at the types of funding model out there. And the economic work that UC Davis is doing will also drive into that. So we certainly are mindful of some of the other fees that are out there, such as an advanced disposal fee that is collected on some products in California. Again, a stewardship model for extended producer responsibility, all of those types of models. Again, each one of those models places the burden of costs in different places throughout the value chain, and also the physical collection costs of the funding. So those are all things we will be taking into consideration as we develop our recommendations.
Okay, very good. I don't see any other hands up. Any other questions?
I think Board Member Krakoff has a question, Chairman.
Mr. Krakoff, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I heard you mention a Diamonds and Wine Secretary, Godkin. I was thinking we're sitting on the wrong commission here.
Seriously.
But in all seriousness, this is a very exciting topic. I want to thank our staff for bringing you here today. We had raised this about 4 or 5 months ago, and very much appreciate that. I've had the opportunity to sit in on a few of the meetings. It's great that Cal EPA is sort of housing this. I know that you've got folks at DTSC, Mr. Omer, folks at Cal Recycle, Ms. Bui, and I think really an approach between your agencies is really necessary on this, and very happy that this is being housed in your agency. The program is for batteries, and we're certainly going to have a lot of those. But part of the big issue for air quality in our basin is heavy duty trucks. And one of your boards and there CARB is passing a lot of rules on heavy duty trucks to make them electric, which in theory is going to really help with the air quality here in our basin. But as you know, Deputy Secretary, those truck batteries are really big. And as we're pushing the heavy duty fleets into electric, it's really important that at the outset we consider that. So I'm hopeful that even though your body is titled, for cars, I hope you're considering, trucks also. As Supervisor Bartlett and Councilman Rodriguez mentioned, we want to make sure that we're thinking these things through with an integrated policy approach, and that as CARB is pushing electric truck batteries, you folks are making sure that we know what we're going to do with those. We don't want to have unintended consequences like we've had a little bit with the lead acid batteries. Even with MTBE, folks thought it was great to put MTBE in our gasoline, and that turned out to cause some unintended consequences because we didn't do the smart planning in the beginning. So this is not an issue that can be swept under the rug. It's really critical that you're doing this work now. And I think it's great that you've got folks from CalRecycle, DTSC, hopefully CARB, Energy Commission, thinking through all of this stuff. Just a couple, an observation and then a question. I think at the end of the day, Mayor McCowan, the consumer is going to have to pay for this, right? One way or the other. If we want to have electric cars, ultimately it's going to be priced in to the car. Now, maybe there's some savings there and over time more efficiencies, but whether it's through an extended producer responsibility model or these other models, ultimately, the consumer, I would imagine, is going to have to pay for it. So if we can do that in a smart, efficient way with good planning, hopefully that will be done with a minimum of economic impacts and a minimum of environmental impacts. Deputy Secretary, this is your obligation under the legislation. We're an air district that mostly deals with stationary sources, although we've got a technology committee that's interested in mobile sources. What role can we as a district play in your process? And how do you think is the best way for us to contribute and help your work?
Thank you for that question. And I also apologize to everybody that my dog felt the need to chime in halfway through when you were talking there, board member. I think I would certainly be happy to provide updates on where we are at. I think it would be great. Obviously, everybody is very busy, but if folks are able to continue monitoring the committee, particularly as we move towards recommendations. As we flesh out recommendations through next year, I think it would be valuable to bring back to folks such as yourselves where we're a draft of our recommendations and where we are headed, and to receive input from either you in your personal capacity or you in this capacity on where the recommendations are headed. We are building in time for review. It again makes me very nervous that the clock is ticking on actually getting recommendations, but to actually be able to gather input and to take recommendations. And just to your point on the heavy duty trucks, yes, absolutely. It is something we think of a lot. And I'm very fortunate that I have Deputy Secretary Sanchez is providing me with some policy support in her perspective as the policy advisor on all things climate and air. And there will be, I suspect, like a Venn diagram of intersecting recommendations of some things which may apply to one end of the truck batteries, but also possibly different models that would apply there. So it is certainly something that we are keeping in mind.
Thank you,
Mr. Krakoff.
Yeah, thank you. Very exciting and very important work. And again, appreciate our staff bringing it to us. I know our staff's busy. I am hopeful that we can continue to track this, and maybe Mr. Miyasato, if your staff has a little bit of time, weigh in at the appropriate stage.
Yes, thank you again to Matt and his team for putting forward this presentation by the Deputy Secretary. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Appreciate your time. I know these are challenging times for the department, but just count us here as a partner moving forward, okay?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, with that, members, if we can turn to, yes,
Sure. We have a
Yes.
public comment. There's a hand
Okay.
raised in public comment.
very good. So let's take on this item.
Yeah,
No action, but we'll turn to public comment, 3 minutes.
yes. Thank you, board members. My name is Ranji George. Thank you, Ms. Carolyn Godkin. I was the ex-TAO scientist in AQMD, and California was the leader, worldwide leader in battery technology and fuel cell and getting the ball rolling. And guess what? In California, we at AQMD, and I had the great honor of leading that charge for batteries and particularly fuel cell technologies as zero emissions, renewables. It will give us energy independence, urban air quality, and now climate change. All several factors played into that role. And I'm glad we are thinking about batteries recycling. We are disappointed that last 20 years, state agency have put all their eggs almost in battery technologies, and they didn't even look at battery recycling. And for the last 9 months, I've been in this committee arguing about battery recycling, making everybody uncomfortable. I apologize for doing that, but thank you that the momentum has begun to address this very serious issue of battery recycling. But one thing the focus is lithium ion recycling, and that's very good. Lithium needs to, because we don't want to get into a confrontation with China. They have, huge resources to control lithium and other rare metals. But I'm also focused on cobalt and other toxic contaminants within the batteries that needs to be addressed. Please do not ignore that, because that's a very huge issue. We should not repeat the disaster of lead acid batteries. They claim 99% recycling, but it's a disastrous, it's a template. We have to remember, cobalt is different from lead, so let's not confuse that. But at least the way it is being done, much of it is now being shipped to Mexico, for Pete's sake. So that's so sad, because if wealthy countries for air quality goes for batteries and then shoves all their waste to developing countries, that's not very good. Please, this environmentally justice is not conformed. Please, and the second thing is, please look at custody. I'm glad you're looking at custody. DTSC, I think, several years ago published a report that consumer batteries have just 2% being recycled. Even though there are recycling factories there, only 2% are being recycled. This is not very good. So you can see the challenges of batteries. That's why I urge you at the state level to look at fuel cells again in a big way. Fuel cells do not have any of these huge implications before coming to the fuel cell and after this. There's no disposal, much, at least the very light footprint. So please do not ignore the technology and bring it back into the same fervor as we had in the early.
Thank you so much. Any other speakers just like to speak on item 4? Okay, seeing none. This item before us is an informational item. No action is required. So members, I'd like to turn your attention back to the top of today's Tech Committee agenda. Let's take item number 1. We can. Item number 1 is now before us. We can read that into the record.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Tom Lee, and this item is to recognize new grant revenue, open a new program announcement, and redistribute funds for Prop 1B truck projects. Next slide, please. We're currently implementing the last funding cycle for the Prop 1B program. For those not familiar, Prop 1B is a voter-approved scrap and replace program for goods movement trucks. And we still currently have some funding available in the program. We have just received a new grant of roughly $6.4 million. This money came from unused funds from CARB's loan assistance program and also their filter substrate replacement program for the DPFs. We have more funds available because of canceled projects from the AB 617 or Community Air Protection Program, which we call CAP. We combine all these funds together, we have approximately 50 million, and these funds all have tight liquidation deadlines. If they're not spent by these deadlines, they have to be returned to CARB. All this funding can be used on clean truck and infrastructure projects that meet Part 1B requirements. Currently, our ports have a good number of pre-2010 diesel trucks that can use this funding immediately to get a quick turnover to near zero emission trucks. We call them NZE trucks. And it's worth noting that NZE trucks are certified at 90% cleaner in NOx emissions than a new diesel truck. Okay, next slide, please. The proposals are to recognize the new funding from CARB to be used for clean trucks and supporting infrastructure. An example of the supporting infrastructure under 1B would be a charging station for a battery electric truck. Issue a new program announcement for Part 1B to solicit new projects. Third item here is to execute and modify contracts on Part 1B eligible projects and to be authorized to use either Part 1B or CAP funding for these contracts. And the last proposed item is to redistribute funding sources between Part 1B and CAP. And that would give us the flexibility to shift expenditures around to funding sources that have higher liquidation deadlines. Tighter liquidation deadlines. Pardon me. Okay, next slide, please. The recommended actions are recognize revenues from the new grant into our Part 1B Fund 81, reimburse roughly 5% of that amount to our general fund for admin costs to run the program, open a new program announcement to bring in new Part 1B projects, execute and modify Part 1B contracts with either CAP or Part 1B funding, and finally, to redistribute between Part 1B and CAP funds whenever necessary so we can meet liquidation deadlines. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Appreciate this. This is exactly the type of funds that we embrace, particularly in the port communities and throughout our major corridors. Question quickly, and who agrees on the percentage for the admin costs? In this case, it's 5%, you mentioned.
The admin cost is written in the grant agreements from CARB. CARB decides on that. We really, what I understand, there's no negotiation on the amount of admin cost.
Okay. Ms. Mitchell, you have a question?
I just want to mention that on this agenda item, I don't have a conflict of interest or any financial interest, but I am a member of the California Air Resources Board, and their funding is involved in the agenda item. So I need to make that announcement first. And then I also want to say that I think it is really important that we get these funds used and we don't have to go back to CARB and say nobody wanted them. We had an instance like that with the VW monies, and I understand that the VW settlement monies had a lot of strings attached. But these are funds that we are accustomed to putting out, and usually they are oversubscribed. So we have a big job in our ports to turn over the trucks that are pre-2010. I think we've got some 5,000 or 6,000, 8,000 trucks that we need to turn over. And I think these funds would be a good use for that purpose. So I urge our staff to be taking a good look at that and seeing how we can use these to get the old dirty trucks out of the port and get some newer, cleaner trucks there.
You're here. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Any other questions, members? Okay, no hands are up.
Mr. Chair, I'll move the item.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Thank you,
We do
sir.
have public comment.
Okay, we have a motion. Anyone second before we go to public comment?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Okay, let's now turn to public comment on item number 1. Speaker, you're on. Speaker, phone ending in 555. You have to unmute him. There you go.
Yeah. Good
Thank you.
afternoon, board members.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. And my name is Ranji George. And when we started the battery and fuel cell program at AQMD, we were the first in the country. we always treated battery and fuel cells equally, 50-50%. Now what has happened in the last, starting around 2000 onwards to 20 years, almost all the money seems to be going into battery technologies and only a 10, 15, 20% into fuel cell. As a result, fuel cell technologies has fallen further and further behind battery technology. A lot of the great fuel cell developers, both technologists and firms, went out of business. So let's not repeat this continuous bias towards batteries. We should set aside the same amount, at least minimum. I would say greater amount for fuel cells, but at least for every $1 you spend on batteries, a reserve fund should be spent on fuel cells, either trucks or infrastructure or education or permitting, because in the long run, we'll all be winners. Thank you, board members.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, seeing none. We have a motion and a second to approve item number 1. Roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Bartlett,
Yes.
Board Member Krakow,
Yes.
Mayor McCallum,
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Yes.
Motion passes 6 ayes.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. With that, let's now move to item number 2. Item 2 is now before us.
Good afternoon. I'm Patricia Kwan, a program supervisor in the Technology Demonstration Group, and I'm here to present on results from the recent CEC audit. Next slide, please. Last year, CEC audited several demonstration projects worth $12.6 million in project funds. These projects resulted in significant emission reductions and commercialized heavy-duty natural gas engines to be 90% cleaner than the existing standard. In addition, there were existing processes and controls that were sound, but additional scrutiny was needed for some of the supporting documentation. So earlier this year, CEC issued a final audit report and resolution of audit findings. Next slide, please. CEC requested reimbursement for unsupported subcontractor costs and return interest earned on CEC funds. This audit report included 2 observations. Next slide. CEC had agreed to advance payment prior to the completion of work to prevent these funds from reverting to the state, with the understanding that South Coast AQMD would pay subcontractors upon satisfactory completion of work, and once that work was completed, interest would be returned to CEC. Next slide, please. 2 contractors agreed to reimburse for unsupported costs. A third contractor is in financial hardship and is unable to reimburse. South Coast AQMD has also agreed to pay the interest earned from CEC funds and has already implemented strengthened financial and project controls as a result of the audit. Next slide. This outlines the proposed reimbursement to CEC, which includes interest on CEC funds that were held, for a total of $488,000. Next slide. So the recommended action is to reimburse CEC for unsupported costs and to return interest earned on CEC funds from Fund 63. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Members, any questions? Please raise your hand. Virtual hand, that is. Okay, seeing none. Any member of the public like to speak on item number 2? Don't see anyone for public comment on item 2. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve item number 2.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell.
Bartlett second.
Thank you, Supervisor. Roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Bartlett,
Yes.
Board Member Krakow,
Yes.
Mayor McCallum,
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Yes.
Motion passes 6 ayes.
Thank you so much. With that, members, let's now turn to our last action item, item number 3. I believe Ms. Kwan, you're up again.
Good afternoon. This item is to amend a contract to install solar for the Volvo Lights project. Next slide, please. So the board had previously approved an award from CARB for Volvo Lights to develop and demonstrate Class 8 battery electric trucks. Since that time, tariffs on solar panels and inverters, as well as construction challenges to comply with COVID-19 requirements, have increased costs for this. Next slide. Solar will create greater flexibility in charging the trucks and freight handling equipment associated with this project, as well as pave the way for future development of microgrids at fleets to enable larger deployments. Next slide. Staff's proposals to reallocate $600,000 of the CARB grant from administrative to project funding for solar at freight handling facilities. Next slide. So this is the proposed project costs. These costs remain the same as previously board approved. The only change is that there would be a requested reallocation of that CARB grant of $600,000 from admin to project funds. Next slide. Recommended action is to amend a contract with Volvo to install solar at freight handling facilities, adding up to $600,000 for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Project Special Revenue Fund 67. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Kwan. With that, members, any questions on the item before us? Item number 3. Let's see any hands. Ms. Mitchell.
I believe I have to announce again that I have no financial interest or conflict of interest, but I'm a member of the California Air Resources Board and their funding is involved here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from members? Okay, hearing none, any member of the public like to speak on item number 3 is before us. Please come forward. Okay, hearing none, okay, entertain a motion.
Bartlett.
Approve item number 3.
Action.
Supervisor Bartlett, thank you.
McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor McCallum. Roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Bartlett,
Yes.
Board Member Krakow,
Yes.
Mayor McCallum,
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino.
Yes.
Motion passes 6 ayes.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Okay, members, moving on to our final item, item 5, an informational item. Who do we have here? Is it Mr. Baroka to speak, to present?
It'll be our Technology Demonstrations Manager, Joseph Impoletti.
Good afternoon,
Mr.
board.
Impoletti there? Good
Yes.
afternoon. The floor is
Good
yours.
My name is Joseph Impoletti. I'm Demonstration Manager of our demonstration group in our Technology Advancement Office. I'm here to talk to you about our Clean Fuels Program proposed plan update for 2021. Every year, our advisory committee meets twice, and we look at our plan with them, and then we make an update. We make recommendations for updating that plan. Next slide, please. This graphic shows the process that technology follows from research to commercialization. The red circle shows typical projects that are funded by the Clean Fuels program. And they are technologies that are in the development, demonstration, and deployment area. Next slide, please. The South Coast Air Basin needs significant reductions in NOx to attain the 75 parts per billion National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ozone. And this has to be completed by 2032. The development of the AQMD effort over the past 18 months is coming closer to our board's consideration and mainly focuses on road and off-road vehicles, especially heavy-duty trucks, as the lowest hanging fruit. The overall goal is to reduce NOx emissions by 45% by 23 and 55% by 2031. The 2016 AQMD identified many control strategies to meet federal ambient air quality standards for ozone and particulate matter, mainly through the control measures to reduce NOx. Control measures were identified for both stationary sources like factories and refineries and mobile sources like cars, trucks, and ships. The facility-based mobile source measures will seek to reduce emissions from indirect mobile sources associated with facilities. For example, trucks visiting the ports or warehouses and construction equipment used in development. Next slide, please. These are some of the state and federal actions that influence our clean fuels plan. From federal agency, proposed funding for 2021 includes a bill for $55 million for DERA funding and $30 million for airshed funding. This is pending congressional approval. If passed, it's a big opportunity for us to go after those funds. The governor's executive order requiring cars of all new passenger vehicles to be zero emission by 2035. And also the CEC has approved just recently a $384 million plan to accelerate zero emission transportation to support the governor's plan. The EPA Clean Trucks Initiative, a future rulemaking to update standards for NOx emissions for highway heavy-duty trucks and engines. This action follows petitions for rulemaking on this issue from 20 organizations, including the South Coast. The CEC Low Carbon Fuel Production Program will facilitate greenhouse gas reductions and reduce criteria and toxic pollutant emissions by funding the in-state production of alternate and renewable transportation fuels. The omnibus low NOx regulation, and one of the key measures in the SIP, the state implementation plan, is the establishment of on-road heavy-duty NOx engine emission requirements that would provide a 90% reduction in NOx emissions compared to today's engines. The truck and bus regulation requires that by January 1st, 23, nearly all trucks and buses will be required to have 2010 or newer model engines to reduce PM and NOx. Starting in 2020, only the vehicles complying with this regulation are going to be able to be registered by the DMV. The CARB Advanced Clean Truck Regulation requires manufacturers who certify Class 2 through 8 chassis or complete vehicles with combustion engines to sell zero-emission trucks as an increasing percentage of their California sales, starting in 2024 and moving through 2030. By 2030, the requirement would be that zero-emission truck chassis sales would need to be 50% of Class 4 through 8 straight trucks and 15% of all other trucks. And finally, the CARB Innovation Clean Truck Transit Regulation, which was adopted in December of 18, and requires all public transit agencies to gradually transition to 100% zero emission bus fleet. Next slide, please. These are some of the key technical areas that we focus on in our clean fuels plan. Priorities on large demonstration for zero emission drayage trucks to test and validate OEM readiness and infrastructure viability coming up soon, like the CEC CARB Zero Emission Drayage Truck and Infrastructure Pilot Project solicitation to deploy large numbers of zero emission on-road drayage trucks in a single fleet and location. Both electric and fuel cell technologies will be eligible. Also defining technology pathways with special projects and engine development programs, as well as near zero emission engine systems, especially with engines of high horsepower uses. Next slide. These technical areas, another technical area is expanding the focus on local biogas production and use, like the CR&R project that is shown in the photo below. Also leveraging OEMs partnerships to focus on deployment of clean fuel vehicles and technologies and infrastructures, on-site hydrogen production and dispensing, and mobile refueling are some of the other key technical areas that we will be focusing on in 2021. Next slide. Here's our planned distribution, which is not a budget per se, but a forecast that reflects the staff's input of future projects and where our emphasis is going to be placed over the next year in each of our key technical areas. Next slide. This is a comparison of the proposed plan update compared to last year's plan with some minor adjustments. The most significant changes are an increase in electric and hybrid development, mainly because of our continued focus on large drayage truck projects. Also, the stationary clean fuels technology decreased because of the number of projects that we funded through this past year. And next slide. And that ends my presentation. If there's any questions or comments.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the presentation. Ms. Mitchell. Judy, you have a question, ma'am? Or are you good?
She's on mute.
Oh. I just want to say that you saw the outline of all of the regulations that CARB has passed this past year. They're all leading to zero emission fleets and vehicles in our state over the next up through 2035, 2045. So these are bold moves and present huge challenges, I think, to the state and to our air districts as well. So, but it's an incredible program that's set out in front of us and very challenging.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Supervisor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. So in reviewing the draft plan, I think there's a good balance of projects that are represented. And I think the continued focus on technologies that support the reductions from the heavy and medium trucks relative to goods movement is certainly the right approach. And there's definitely value in the continued and enhanced efforts on developing and demonstrating the EV tech and infrastructure. So I think we're moving in the right direction, especially when you talk about the trends in consumer vehicles as well. So thank you very much for the presentation. And I think we're focusing on the right things and moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other members on the queue, any member of the public like to speak on item 5, please come forward. Yes, phone ending in 555.
Yes, good afternoon, board members. I just want to compliment the staff. They had a technology advancement office meeting. It was half a day or so, or a little more than half a day. And they were very informative, very specific. And they had a good session on battery technologies and fuel cell technologies. And they handle the public, my questions very forthrightly, with integrity. I mean, they didn't give a bureaucratic response. They listened and tried to answer point by point. And I'm very grateful for that. I rarely get that treatment. And thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your passion as evidence in your comments as we're moving forward. And thank you for your advocacy and your guidance. With that, members, any other member of the public like to speak? Ms. Bartlett, your hand's back up. Is that, you already spoke, right? Okay, with that, this is an informational item only, no action needed. So members, any other business before this committee, please come forward now. Any announcements? Any member of the public like to speak on a non-agenda item? Non-agenda item, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, this committee is now adjourned. Have a great weekend. Be safe, be kind. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you
Very much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Joe, I like your beard. Stuff to add.